through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The Diagnosis, a pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relaks Radio.
The Diagnosis, a pro analysis where we try to find solutions for whatever questions we have in the country. So today we have a very, very special guest with us. I don't really know. I mean, there's no specific way to introduce the guest we have today. So he's an economist, an international civil servant, and a banker. We have Mr. Dheerasinghe with us today on the Diagnosis, a pro analysis brought to you by Relax Radio. So, Mr. Dheerasinghe, hello and welcome to Relax Radio.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be on your program here.
Thank you, Mr. Dheerasinghe. I know that you're a very busy person, so I really, really appreciate you being here today with us. So, before we move on, I want to know, could you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, as you said, I'm an economist. I must tell you that I'm a multifaceted professional. Started my career as a banker. I have my first degree in economics and commerce, and then I moved into the central bank, which is the banking regulator in Sri Lanka. And thereafter, I had my postgraduate studies in economics and came back to central bank and served there for 37 years. Of that 37 years, I was at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, as an alternate executive director for Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Sri Lanka for about 2.5 years. While I was there, I was promoted here uh, at the central bank to the position of deputy governor. So I had to come back. So I served, and that was my last job at the central bank, and I retired. And then I moved into commercial bank of Ceylon PLC, which is the largest and most awarded private bank in Sri Lanka. And I was on the board for 9 years. That's the longest period you can serve on the board of a bank or finance and leasing company licensed by the bank, only for 9 years, or your age of 70 years, whichever occurs first. So I was chairman for nearly 7 years and retired recently in 2021. And still, I'm in the private sector in several companies on the board, mainly as chairman.
That is very impressive, Mr. Dheerasinghe, and I feel very honored to have you on my show today. Now, since we talked about it, since it's very impressive the career that you have, the experiences that you have, what are like the most memorable experiences that you've had in your career?
So I said, my career started in 1975. This is my 47th year. In a few months, I'll be completing 47 years. So you get a lot of, memorable
I bet you do.
occasions you can think of. If I keep on talking, so I can, like Arabian Nights, I can, I can tell you many things.
What are like the
But
most memorable
I enjoyed whatever the job I did wherever I worked, and I can remember I'm now looking at the country, the crisis that we are experiencing in this country. I said that I was at the International Monetary Fund as an alternate executive director, and that was the period 2000, mid 2007 to early 2020, 2010, for about 2.5 years, and I was able to negotiate a loan in the jargon you call it standby arrangement at the IMF, 2.6 billion US dollars to the government of Sri Lanka, to the central bank, which is the banking regulator, to boost up the reserves, external reserves of the central bank. And while I was at central bank, I have done a lot, and the current debt management systems at the central bank. I was head of public debt department, and I who introduced the electronic bidding system, the central depository system for government securities, and the and some debt instruments like Sri Lanka development bonds, which is a US dollar denominated bond issued in Sri Lanka, and also the international sovereign bond, which is being issued in international markets.
Oh, that's actually very interesting to listen, Mr. Dheerasinghe. So, coming back to the country, Sri Lanka, right now, the current crisis we are facing, the economical crisis, I think you're the best person to, have a conversation about this matter. Now, how to best define the current crisis in layman's terms? How to define this current economical crisis that Sri Lanka is going through?
You may call it an economic crisis. The crisis has been there uh, for a couple of years for some for some decisions that the government has taken, and as a result, the crisis emerged, and people started feeling the impact of the crisis because they uh, uh, couldn't find their essential items for their uh, livelihood, like the essential food items, the oil, the power, the electricity, and then they started reacting. So that has now developed into a social crisis, and to solve this uh, problem here we are facing in this country, you need to first address the foreign currency reserves, the shortage of foreign currency. We need to import um, goods to Sri Lanka, which are essential items like oil and other food items. And if you look at uh, the the structure of our import and exports, and you might find that Sri Lanka is highly dependent on foreign trade, both
Exactly.
imports and exports. We earn our dollars by exporting commodities, and then we we need more dollars to import our requirements. And if you look at the composition of our imports, we spend about 50% of our uh, uh, of dollars we get, or rather, the 50% of our import bill, if I may say that in a different way, for import of intermediate goods, which are petroleum uh, and chemicals like industrial and agrochemicals, fertilizer, and things like that. Another 25% investment goods, and the balance 25%, 20 to 25% percentage changes year by year, or import of consumer goods, including consumer durables like the motor vehicles and other items.
Now, since you've been in the banking sector, Mr. Dheerasinghe, now are there any noticeable changes in the banking system and the sector with this current crisis in Sri Lanka, the economical crisis? Were there any changes, noticeable changes in the banking sector due to the crisis?
So I said that we are heavily dependent on foreign trade,
Yes.
right? And what does it mean? That when we export goods or services, you get your income in dollars or in whatever convertible foreign currency, uh, and that happens through the banking system.
Yes.
And when you import, you have to pay in foreign currency, whatever the uh, currency that your suppliers prefer to have, maybe US dollars or euro or Japanese yen or whatever the currency. So for that, you need a banking. You need you have to set up what is called, uh, for example, the letter of credit, right? And the buyers will want you to pay in foreign currency, right? That happens through the banking system. So both the inflows and outflows of foreign currency happens through the banking system. So what is now lacking in the banking system is the foreign inflows of uh, dollars and other convertible foreign currencies.
Now, it happened because of the current economical crisis. Now, were there any deficiencies in the banking system and the sector even before this crisis happened? Now, since you've been in the banking sector for so long.
I must say, I must be fair by the banking system and the banking regulator in Sri Lanka, because I myself was a banking regulator, and then I was a banker myself
Yes.
uh, in my career at the beginning and at the end of it. Um, so, banking system in Sri Lanka is strong and robust. Is well regulated. Is one of the well regulated sectors in our economy. I don't see any fundamental issue in the
Obviously,
banking
when we
system at the
have
moment.
bankers and economists like you, it is well regulated, right?
So one of the functions of the central bank is to ensure uh, financial system stability. The central bank, which is the regulator of the banking system, has two main objectives. One is economic and price stability. The other is the financial sector system stability. Those are the two prime objectives of the central bank.
So, when it comes to actually the crisis in Sri Lanka, now, personally, what are your thoughts about the economic crisis? Why Sri Lanka came to this position, and is there any way that we can find a solution for this crisis here?
Right now, we are a developing country.
Exactly.
Right now, at some point, we were at a level of about 4,000 US dollars of per capita income.
Mhm.
Right now, it has dropped to about 3,600 because the GDP, the gross domestic product, for the last 2 3 years has been low or even sometimes in the negative territory. So the GDP per capita has come down as a result, right? So there is what is called middle income trap, and to get out of it, we need to have um, measures to ensure the growth of the economy in the country. So we are a country which is dependent on trade, which is a small. If you define the economy of Sri Lanka in economic terms, I must say it's a small economy. Small economy. In a small economy, you can't produce everything that you need, right? So you have to import uh, part of it, and we have been importing more goods and services than what we produce, right? So if you look at import bill, it has been around or sometimes over 20 billion US dollars a year. Our export income has been hovering around 10 billion. So we have been spending twice as much as we earn.
Yes, exactly. So, now these days we hear about the central bank, them printing rupees. Then it is reported that it leads to inflation. Now, how can we generally understand what inflation is?
Yeah, the the textbook definition of inflation is the continuous rise, I quote, continuous rise in the general price level, unquote. continuous rise in the general price level. Right? Now, there are ways of measuring the rise in the price level, which is the price index. So we have what is called Colombo Consumers Price Index, CCPI we call it, Colombo Consumers Price Index. So we have point to point, what was the index 1 year ago, 1 month ago, what is the index today. So there's a percentage increase. That's called point to point growth of the price index. And also moving average. That's a statistical calculation that you get the average rate of growth of the inflation. So what we are having in Sri Lanka now, the latest data that have been issued by the Census and Statistics Department and the Central Bank is that our food inflation is around 39%. For some international agencies, I have seen that in newspapers and some media reports that our inflation is much higher than the official number that has been announced.
Yes,
It
we
has
have seen
gone over 100%, right? That which means the price level, prices of goods and services have been on the rise continuously, right? Which is not a good thing, right?
Now, in your opinion, Mr. Dheerasinghe, who's responsible for this? Who is responsible? Is it the government? Is it the workers of the economical sector?
I must say that you can't point the
Point
finger
fingers,
at
yes.
one person or one set of organizations or set of people. It has been, I suppose, it's wrong policies that we have adopted, and we have not been able to ensure the stability of the economy, and as a result, we have been in this situation today, which we call it crisis. So I think what we have now is to ensure that we get out of this crisis, rather than thinking about who did what,
And
and
to put the blame on them.
and who is responsible and who is not, but to look at the possible options we have to get out of this crisis.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Dheerasinghe. And now, the public, the general public of Sri Lanka, they are very afraid of their futures in the country. Now, what are like the short and long-term impacts that we face due to this current economical crisis in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, as a result of this crisis, the whole economy has now come to a standstill. Because most of the industries depend uh, heavily uh, on um, on various inputs like oil and electricity, and the supply has got interrupted, and you don't have a continuous supply, and the mobility is the other issue, because these fuel crisis today, the shortage of petrol and diesel, and as a result, the mobility of goods and services um, is being affected, and as also the mobility of people. Now people have to travel from their home to their places of work, and you have to move goods and services from one place to the other. So whatever people produce, say for example, the farmers produce vegetables, fruits, and things like that. Those have to be transported to the economic centers or markets, and that is not happening. And therefore, uh, the farmers are affected, and those intermediaries, people who transport and people who engage in wholesale business, they're affected, and also the at the other end, the consumers are affected.
This, I think the economical crisis that Sri Lanka is facing right now, this is a huge problem for us, and we have to find solutions for this as soon as possible. Now, as an economist, as a banker, as an international civil servant, what kind of remedies would you suggest for this whole situation in order for us to get out of this situation?
I think we need to look at uh, firstly the short term, immediate solutions. How to address the shortage of um, oil, gas, and other essential items. You need to ensure the supply of those items immediately,
Immediately, yes.
and then we'll have to look at the medium term solutions, and then the long term. Right, you have to plan it out and ensure stability of the economy and growth and stability. One thing, you need growth. If you produce more, and then uh, value addition in different sectors like agriculture, industry, and other services, you need to ensure some value addition. So the growth, or rather gross domestic product, or whatever you call it, is sum of value addition in different sectors. So you need to add value. You need to produce, and what you spend on your inputs, um, and you have to produce goods and services, and then the value of those goods and services had to be um, have to be uh, more than the cost that you have spent on producing those things. So you need to ensure that process. So that has to happen in all sectors, the the agriculture, industry, and other services. Right? You can't just think of one sector. Say, for example, the tourism that is affected, because tourism is affected because tourists can't come here, and there are travel advisories issued in different countries. They don't come because they come here, they will have to face these problems: shortage of food, shortage of other items, and lack of uh, other essentials. So the tourists don't come, so we lose income from it. We have invested uh, billions of rupees on tourism infrastructure, and for which we don't get any return, right? So we have to ensure, like other sectors, you uh, produce things and add value to the economy. That's what you call, you generate growth.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, if these remedies are, put into action, if such remedies are taken, what is likely the time frame that we can assure that the situation in Sri Lanka will get back to normal? Is there
I
any hope
must.
very soon?
I just said that we need to have very short term,
Yes.
immediate solutions to ensure the supply of essential items for livelihood immediately, and then medium to long term. So for us to see some stability in our system, we need at least 3 to 5 years in the medium term, and my guesstimate is, for us to see some long term stability in our economy, it might take more than 8 to 10 years.
Now, that's a very long time. Now, since you yourself is an economist, do you think that, are there any ways that you can assist the government? Give up your ideas, giving your ideas, and let them know the solutions that they can take.
You're right. I mean, this is one way you communicate.
Yes,
There's no other way. The media has a role.
exactly.
Media has a role, and I just mentioned to you a little while ago that um, you need to communicate, and this communication has to happen both ways.
Exactly.
Periphery to the center and center to the periphery. So then the when the information is moving from periphery to the center, you uh, the policy makers, the government and other responsible authorities will get a feedback from the people and what they feel and what they need, that kind of thing. And again, the policies that the government is taking and the measures the government is taking, the strategies and steps the government has put in place has to be communicated. That must go from the center to the periphery. I think in that context, the media has an important role.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe, and I completely agree with you, and which is why we want you to, be as descriptive as possible and let out your ideas. Now, coming back to the youngsters of Sri Lanka, as we can see, a lot of people, not just the youngsters, a lot of people migrate. Now, has this in any way affected the crisis, the economical stability of the country?
You mean the
People migrating from
my
the
people
country.
migrating? Yeah, I mean people have migrated from Sri Lanka to other countries. That has happened over the last 50 or 60 years. I mean, that situation has aggravated now because
Exactly.
people find, um, as I said earlier, the livelihood is affected and people can't find essential uh, items um, for their day-to-day living. That's
Exactly,
one.
Mr. Dheerasinghe.
And a lot of people have lost their jobs, and the younger generations and who are uh, looking for jobs and other opportunities, like even people who are mm, looking for to set up self-employment opportunities, or uh, some people who have some entrepreneurship skills. Those people are finding it difficult to you know unleash their potential.
Exactly, yes.
So that's an issue. So they think that there is no hope in staying in this country, and therefore they look for opportunities or leave in the country. So that is happening now. So if you go to the passport office and you hear daily in the news that the passport office cannot cope with the demand. And again, if you go to the airport, you will find hundreds of thousands of people are leaving. So that is happening because people have felt that, especially the young people,
Especially the young people, yes.
right? They are looking for opportunities, whatever the opportunity they get, and also the government is also encouraging now.
For them to
And
leave.
you must have heard that the government, even the government employees, at the moment, the government is encouraging those people to leave the country and go abroad and find employment. And the government has, I think, they are trying to uh, introduce a system of no pay leave for people to take, say, leave up to 5 years or so from their jobs here in the government, and to leave the country and be employed somewhere and then come back.
That's very interesting. I think we definitely have to talk more about that. But before that, we have to move to a short commercial break. Before going to the break, I want to quickly remind you guys that you can follow us on all our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as well. So make sure that you go and follow us and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Relax Radio if you still haven't subscribed to that. With that being said, we are moving to a short commercial break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The diagnosis. A pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relaks Radio. Through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The diagnosis. A pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relaks Radio.
Hello and welcome back to The Diagnosis, a pro analysis where we talk about literally everything that's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment and where we try to find solutions for the problems that we have. Now, before we move on, I want to quickly remind you guys the ways that you can join with us. You can follow us on all our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as well, literally on every single social media platform. And make sure that you go and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Relax Radio because you're definitely missing out on a lot of good stuff that we have in store for you if you are not subscribed, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel of Relax Radio. And make sure that you download the Relax Radio app that's available on both iOS and Android devices for free download so that we can stay connected 24/7 365 and we can have a great time filled with positivity. Now coming back to Mr. Dheerasinghe, we have a very professional character with us today, Mr. Dheerasinghe, an economist, a banker, and an international civil servant. Now, we were talking about migration and how people, a lot of youngsters in Sri Lanka, especially during this time, migrate to other countries. And you brought in the fact that the government has actually encouraged the people to migrate on a no pay. I mean, to take leaves on no pay. Now, let's talk more about that. Let's come back to that. What is this exactly? What is this whole scenario with the government letting people go on leave for no pay?
Right. To answer your question, I must say that Sri Lanka has been having a basic issue in providing employment to the school leavers and other people who get qualified in various fields. Therefore, we call it unemployment. There is certain percentage of employable people are unemployed without employment. And add to that, as a result of the crisis, both in the public and private sector, um, now they have found that they cannot cope with the the people whom they have already employed to pay their wages. In the private sector, you need to generate income. Your income over your expenditure, and you need to ensure that your activities generate profit to pay their wages and then to continue in your business. So that is being affected now as a result of the crisis. And also the government, same, there is general belief that you get more people employed in the government, and the government also has in the past has used the government uh, departments and ministries and other government agencies like the statutory boards and corporations to provide employment. So um, those have been the policies that the government has been using to solve the unemployment problem of the youth, whether they are employed in in productive sectors or not. Yet, just to find a solution to provide employment, those employment opportunities have been given to the unemployed people. So, some of those people have been now found unproductive. So, the government at some point, I remember in some government agencies, they have been giving golden shake hands. Even those people who still have economically active life till their retirement have been retired prematurely. That happened in the past in this country. And now, of course, we have come to a situation because of the crisis, both the government and the private sector could not continue with their employees. So they are looking for opportunities of retiring them and reducing the number of people who are employed. So that's why they look for various opportunities, especially to encourage migration.
Now, as an economist, what do you think is the solution for this? Do you have any idea? I mean, in your personal opinion, do you have like a solution for this, a remedy for this, an idea that the government can implement in order to solve this?
The idea is that I mean, we call it the human resource potential in this country has not been employed. So that's one of the factors of production, to use the labor uh, and other skilled labor as well as unskilled for various productive activities or services uh, to generate employment. So those opportunities are not available, not sufficient to provide employment for those school leavers and other people who are, qualified in various fields of professional, uh, you know, uh, uh, sectors.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, that is something that we actually face on a daily basis. There are people who are qualified enough, but they can't find a proper job to match with their qualifications. Now, coming back to the crisis in Sri Lanka, now, this is the economical crisis didn't just happen overnight. And not just the economical crisis, we're actually facing a political crisis as well. Now, I know that you might not be into politics a lot, but what's your personal opinion on the political crisis that's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment?
You can't detach the economy from politics,
Exactly, my point. Yes.
right? They both go together. One depends on the other. If there is no economic crisis, there is no political crisis. Now there is political crisis, there is economic crisis, and vice versa.
Now, the politicians and the members of the cabinet. Now, in your opinion, are they qualified enough to provide leadership in these trying times?
That's so obvious. We are in this crisis situation because we didn't have the kind of leadership that we would have had to bring this country to the next level.
Exactly.
So we have been stagnating at some point, and now it has developed into a crisis situation.
I have to agree with you, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, that being said, I have a question for you, and that is, would you ever consider becoming a politician?
No, not at all. At this point, I'm too old.
But then we have very old politicians in Sri Lanka. So why don't you give it a try for that? I mean, being an economist, a very professional banker, and an international civil servant, don't you think that it is your responsibility, taking into consideration your experience in the field and how you can assist the current system in Sri Lanka? Don't you think that it's your responsibility to be out there and provide solutions and help the people in general in Sri Lanka?
But my personal opinion is that I can add value more in my profession,
In your profession,
in the private sector,
then
not
moving
as
to
a
the
politician
yes.
and not in the government.
Exactly. But Mr. Dheerasinghe, politicians, they kind of have the power to implement things, to implement whatever they want to. And most of the time in the private sectors or in our respective sectors, we do not get the power to implement or whatever we want to. What do you think about that? Doesn't that make you want to join politics? Just so that you can join to politics, then you have the power to implement and make this country a better place.
Yeah, ironically, in Sri Lanka, if you take the government and the private sector, uh, the role of the government has to provide support and for the private sector to um, produce goods and services and add value to the economy so that we ensure the growth of the economy. But the 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 the, the authorities, the government has failed to provide the necessary support to the private sector, and instead the politicians and officials have got the wrong end of the stick, and they have been doing various other things but not doing what they're supposed to do.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, this is why many Sri Lankans, especially even the youth of Sri Lanka, despise the politicians and despise getting into parliament and politics in general. Now, that being said, since you are very well experienced in this particular field of banking, you are an economist. Now, there might be people out there who want to become as successful as you are, who want to acquire, the experiences and the knowledge that you've acquired. Now, can we talk a bit about the background, the educational background that you have possessed, and how you got into this position?
Yeah, as a little boy, school boy, um, I wanted to be a banker.
You wanted to be a banker
Banker. And that
from the very
was my
beginning.
ambition.
Okay.
So I became a banker, and when I got qualified with my first degree, I had a lot of opportunities. Those days, that was in mid 1970s, there were a lot of opportunities, employment opportunities for graduates who got good first degrees. So I chose out of the number of opportunities I had, I chose to join a bank. So I first joined one of the leading state banks, and I was there for 2 years. Then I thought I need to uh, to do some postgraduate and get qualified and get some professional qualifications as well. And thinking about my career path, that's the reason why I joined the central bank.
That's interesting, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, there might be people out there, especially the youngsters, who want to become a bankers, who want to become economists, and who would like to be, who would like to run the economical situation, the economical status of the country one day. What is like one advice that you can give them?
Yeah, we get a lot of talented people. I mean, here in Sri Lanka, you get good education, you have good schools, and you get primary and secondary education in those schools. Then we have about 16 or 17 local universities. Yet we have university admission restricted to a certain number. At the moment, about 25 to 30,000 per year. Yet we have many more who are deprived of admission to local universities. Therefore, they go overseas. I can remember at some point we had about 15,000. That was about 5, 6 years ago when I looked at some numbers. The the Sri Lankan students, girls and boys, studying in foreign universities.
Now, do you think that Sri Lanka has failed in that aspect because we don't have
I would think so. I would think so. In the 50s and 60s, there were foreign students coming to Sri Lanka to study.
to study?
In
But now it
some
happens the other way around.
neighboring countries, some Colombo schools, we had students from foreign countries. At the moment, you don't find any. Instead, our girls and boys go overseas and find
There's a lot of Sri Lankans overseas
opportunities
studying.
in India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Malaysia, Thailand.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, I think you agree that Sri Lanka has failed its students in that aspect. Now, coming back to education, since we were talking about education and all the economical side, Sri Lanka's economic education, how do you think about it? The bankers, the knowledge that they get. And I remember you telling that we are very stable when it comes to the banking community, the banking sector in Sri Lanka, the economical sector in Sri Lanka, not the economical system that we have right now. You said that it's very stable when it comes to the banking sector.
Right.
Now, the education, the knowledge that they receive, is it in a good stable? I mean, is it good enough? Are we capable enough to compete with the other countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I said at some point that Sri Lanka is a small economy.
Exactly, yes.
And as a result, we have a small market. Now, if you think about a bank, for example, or any other industry like the garment industry or any industry, you name anything, that uh, opportunity is there. So we need to move out of this country because our market is very small.
Very small, yes.
That's why our garment manufacturers have moved into other countries.
So is there any way
Because
that we can
sometimes you
expand
find
it?
cheap labor in those countries. and you have more other advantages in producing at a lower cost, and and that must bring in some benefits to the country. So as a result of our manufacturers and entrepreneurs moving out, like the banks moving out of the country, and they earn income in those countries. That income, if that income comes back to the country, then we can see the countries progressing as a result. But it is not happening,
Because they're
and
moving out.
because of the instability in the country, they keep their income overseas, and they use those funds in those markets and not bringing the money back to the
Back to
country.
the country. Now, is there any possibility for us to expand our market other than migrating to another country and then going for another country?
Yeah, but now most of the local companies have set up their business in Dubai, in Singapore,
All in
and
other
in London,
countries, yes.
and sometimes US, Canada, Malaysia, Thailand,
Yeah.
even in countries like Myanmar, Vietnam. So they find the the uh, the 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 conditions in this country are not conducive for their business. Therefore they go.
Which is actually very sad to hear. Now, if they can run well here in Sri Lanka, if they can run a business well in Sri Lanka, I think that will affect and that will make the economical situation in Sri Lanka to grow, right?
Yeah, I mean we have enough resources in this country
Exactly.
for the good of the country, to ensure the country's economy is growing. We need to ensure that we mobilize those resources and produce goods and services. But the 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 policy framework and other factors that you need to help those industries to uh, uh, to set up and then uh, to grow is something that we're lacking in this country. There is no policy framework that will help and encourage and motivate those people to set up their industries and produce.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Now, Mr. Dheerasinghe, it's very clear that Sri Lanka is not the only country that's facing an economical crisis and that has faced an economical crisis. So other countries even they have faced such crises as well, especially when it comes to the economical status. Now, how can we learn a lesson from the other countries?
There have been instances now, for example, there was something called the East Asian crisis. So, at the East Asian crisis in late 1990s, that was about 25 years ago, most of the East Asian countries are affected. Those countries like Korea, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, even Japan to some extent. And there was global economic crisis. That was during 2007 to 2010. And most of the countries, including Sri Lanka, were affected. And some countries had bigger problems than what we are experiencing today. So you need to have necessary policies in place, and to have the commitment, and to provide whatever the resources that are necessary for us to get out of this crisis.
So it is possible for us to get out of this crisis, but we really need the necessary policies and the procedure to work on that properly.
Yeah, you are right, because we need leadership. We need the right policies to get out of the crisis.
Exactly.
If you don't, then we will have the crisis to continue, and sometimes the situation will be worse than
What we have
what
right
it is
now.
today.
Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now coming back to yourself, because you're such an interesting character, what do you think is like you've studied here in Sri Lanka and you've studied abroad as well. So what is like your professional achievement? What's the most outstanding professional achievement that you would say that you've achieved?
I studied in two universities here, Colombo and Peradeniya, and then I moved into uh, England for my master's degree, and there I had the opportunity was doing my master's degree in economics at University of Leeds in Yorkshire, and I also had some affiliation with London School of Economics because my master's degree dissertation was supervised by a professor from London School of Economics, and then I had some programs. I participated in countries like Australia and USA in some universities. So I have a mix of
This is
uh,
very interesting.
in education and experience
I think that is why
and
that you've
academic programs
become
and research work. Affiliated with those countries
a
in the
lot
world.
of countries, and which is the very reason why you've become a very versatile, a very experienced person, I believe. Now, actually, we've come to the end of the program, but before moving on, I'm pretty sure that there are people out there who want to become someone like you who want to excel in their career, especially, and who want to become an economist or a banker, because we have a lot of bankers in Sri Lanka, I assume, especially youngsters joining into the banking sector. Now, what would you say to them? Is this a profession? Is this a career that you would suggest that they should work on? Or is this a career? Is this very hard? I mean, obviously, any career is very hard. But what would you say to them, to anyone who wants to become someone like you in the future?
You need commitment,
Exactly.
and you must always depend on yourself. You must always be a self-made person. You should not depend on other people, and it depends on the individual. What he or she likes to do. Sometimes when you are in school, some kids say, "No, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a businessman. I want to be a banker. I want to be an accountant." So uh, I want to do my studies in IT and become an IT engineer or professional. So it depends on the individual's interest, and then you need to really be guided, and then you need a commitment on your part. And
Exactly.
you need to be motivated. Motivation is something that comes within yourself.
Within. Exactly, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Now, before we end the program, before we move on and end the diagnosis today, what do you think about the program?
So I like it. I mean, it's a one hour program. I never felt that we spent
Time
1 hour.
passing.
So those are interesting questions, and hope people who are listening to this program would have also, benefited by our
Exactly,
conversation.
Mrs. Dheerasinghe. I think because I myself gathered a lot of knowledge from today's program, and I'm pretty sure that the listeners, the audiences that we had today, might have learned a lot as well. Especially because in Sri Lanka, we have to learn things by ourselves most of the time because transparency is not something that we see from our government. So when it comes to the economical crisis, I'm pretty sure that whatever you shared, the information that you shared were pretty insightful, and that the audience, the listeners that we have, gained a lot of knowledge as much as I did. So that being said, I want to make this a moment to thank you, Mr. Dheerasinghe. Thank you. I know you're a very busy person. So thank you for making your time and coming to Relax Radio and sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you so much, Mr. Dheerasinghe, for that.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me on this program.
Obviously, Mr. Dheerasinghe. So that being said, we've actually come to the termination of our program. So stay tuned because we will be right back next year, same time, same day, with another interesting character to talk about the current situation in Sri Lanka and how we can get out of it. So that being said, before we wind things up, I want to quickly remind you guys how we can stay connected. Make sure that you go and download the Relax Radio app, which is available on both iOS and Android devices for free download. Yes, you heard me right. It's available for free download. So make sure that you go and download it, and that way we can stay connected anywhere, anytime. And make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel of Relax Radio and follow us on all our social media platforms. You're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as well. So that being said, this is your host, Mika Thompson, signing off from The Diagnosis, a pro analysis where we talk about and start different solutions for the crisis here in Sri Lanka. And that being said, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and goodbye and take care until we meet next time.
Through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The Diagnosis. A pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relaks Radio.